Welcome to the Love Lessons podcast, a space for you to invest in your most important relationships 20 minutes at a time. Today, I sit down with author and lead pastor of New Life Fellowship Church, Rich Villodas. Here's today's episode.
Rich, so good to have you with us today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So let's dive straight in. Rich, tell us, because you haven't always been a Christian churchgoer, how did that happen from that to pastor of New Life Fellowship Church?
Yeah, very simply, I'll tell the quick story. My family did not grow up in church. We grew up in a home that was quite indifferent to it, but my parents would send me to church with my grandparents who lived down the block from us, and it was there that I got my first conceptions of who God was, the holiness of God, the majesty of God. But by the time I was 12, I wasn't really getting anything out of it, mostly because of the language barrier. Spanish wasn't my first language, English was. And so I asked my parents if I could stop going to church. They said yes. I stopped attending church, but found myself back in church as a 17-year-old because I started dating a pastor's daughter, and that got me back into church very quickly. I started hearing Jesus say, yeah, go to church now. I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so dated this girl for a few years. Relationship came to an end, and there's nothing like teenage heartbreak. I mean, that'll bring you to Jesus very quickly. And so I found myself so depressed and walked from Queens to Brooklyn, where I lived, a good hour and a half walk, and came home to my father coming off of a hangover, my mother in the kitchen, my 4 younger siblings invited to that church. I decided to go there for someone maybe to pray for me. I didn't know they were having a revival service, but I thought maybe someone can pray for me because I'm so depressed. And I got there, and a preacher got up, started preaching about the good news of Jesus. And 15 family members came to faith in Jesus that night, 1999, August, in a small storefront church in Brooklyn, New York. And then from there, in terms of becoming a pastor, I mean, here's the short story. The first 6 months, I wondered, my father, to this day, is a DJ, and I was a rapper. So I can rap pretty well. I'm not going to do it today, but I can spit some bars.
Have you got like a little one? Have you got like a small one?
A small one?
Yeah, like a little rap.
You guys don't want to hear a small one. All right, so I'll give it to you then. So I'm from East New York, Brooklyn, okay? Can anything come out of East New York? Picken Ave, Elton Street, where I learned to walk with my eyes wide open like a skeptical hawk. In my formative years, yeah, I yearned to talk like a tough guy, really, but I was no Hulk. But you gotta maintain, it was in my brain to make something of my life, so I went to Lane. No studies, but you know I played those games. No goals in life, but had gold chains. But all that changed, my life rearranged by an act of grace. Now let me explain. All right, that's all I got there.
Wow,
that's all I got.
So good.
Listen. So anyway, I was a rapper, and my father was a DJ. And where was I going with that there? Okay, and so I realized I had a sense as a child, my father would bring me to these nightclubs when I was 12 and 13 years old. Not good parenting, but they had these talent nights at these clubs, and my father was like, I'm DJing, how about you come and you rap in front of all these drunken adults here? So I said, okay, great. And so I would do that. When I became a Christian, I had a sense that I had an ability to be before people, but I was really nervous about preaching. So I said, Lord, can you confirm to me that I'm called to preach? The first 6 months after coming to Jesus, my youth group would either host a youth gathering or go to another church where there would be an evangelist. And 6 times within the first 6 months, while it was ministry time, like you guys do here, we'll have a time of prophetic ministry. And the guy would say, you in the white shirt, could you stand up? And I say, I have a white shirt on. And this is very new to me. So I stand up and he says, the Lord is calling you to preach. And the Lord is calling you to do this. And I go, wow, that was really strange. But confirming what I feel in my heart. The next month, we'd go at another church. Another preacher would say, you in the blue shirt. And someone would say, you're wearing blue, stand up. And so I stand up. And like a very similar word. The sixth guy, a guy by the name of Pastor Roberto Seda, said to me, hey, as I was preaching, I was looking at you. I have a word for you, but I don't have time to give it to you now. Can you call me tomorrow? I said, this is very strange. So I called him the next day. This pastor, he pastored a church called the Upper Room. They met in a basement. This is no lie here. And so he says, when I saw you, I saw you preaching before nations. I'm 19 years old at this time. And all I know are like Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, Jamaicans. That's all I know at this point. He said, I saw you before people from Asia and people from Africa and people from Europe. I just saw you from there. And so that was the first 6 months. My pastor had a stroke. He was an old man. And from that point on, he couldn't preach anymore. But because I was like I was at every service. I was at the women's service, the men's service, the young adult service. I was just hungry for God. And he said, why don't you preach for me? It's a church of about 25 people, and you preach for me. And so from that point on, he would send me to these small churches in New York City, and I would preach. And from there, I went to college, got a little bit of structure, and here I am at 44 years old. I've been doing this for 25 years.
Wow. Rich, something I've been thinking about is that that not you personally, but you bring you into every relationship you hold. It's like the connecting factor between us and friends, us and romantic relationships, with family. It's like you bring you into every relationship. So before we talk about any other relationship that we hold, we should talk about like you, like how you are. How do you, I mean, you focus a lot on this in your work. How do we be the like healthy version of us? And that's obviously quite a big question and a lot of work within that. But you talk a bit about contemplative rhythms, interior examination, and also this is something often linked to like, which I think is unhelpful, like, oh, whilst you're single, you should be doing these things. But actually it's like, when does self-development and interior examination stop, just because you got in a relationship or marriage? This is for all of us to do.
Yeah.
Just tell us a bit more about how we do that, if we bring us into every relationship we hold.
Yeah, I think the question is, am I bringing my true self into this, or am I bringing a false self? Am I bringing a self that I want you to see, or am I truly living with integrity in terms of congruence? What's on the inside is consistent with what's happening on the outside. And so I don't know if that happens without a strong commitment to interior examination. And for a number of reasons. Much of the reasons why we don't bring our full selves into our relationships is because we have not clarified our values around what's important to us, what's meaningful to us. Or we have been so shaped by our families of origin, which is why we have a saying in our church that says, Jesus might live in your heart, but grandpa lives in your bones. Which is to say that all of us have positive legacies that we have received from our families of origin, and we have negative legacies that we have received from our families of origin. And the degree to which our lives can line up with Jesus and the way of his kingdom, receiving and cherishing the positive legacies that we've received, but resisting and repenting from the negative legacies that we received. So for example, let's just say conflict for a moment. If you grew up in a home that did not know how to negotiate differences well, that whenever there's a difference going on, you're either passive aggressive, or you lie, or you don't tell the truth, or you're not honest, that's very easy. I mean, those are things to be repented of. How do we live in how do we live in truth? How do we live in honesty? How can we be direct and honest and kind in our words? So I think part of it, number one, begins with our willingness to slow down our lives, to be with God, but also to be with ourselves. What's important to me? What do I value? What brings me life? What brings me joy? What drains life out of me? And I think the extent to which we can do that, now this is very difficult because we live in a very busy, frenetic world, that we're so caught up on our devices. It's so easy to get swallowed up whole through technology that we're strangers to ourselves. And so I do think the first invitation is, what does it mean to slow down our lives, not just to be with God, but to be with ourselves as well?
Well, what do you do, Rich? How do you, in your life, because I imagine it's very busy, like you've got lots of things to do, families to look after, just practically, what do you do like in a day? Or do you have particular rhythms or practices that you use to help you in these in the interior examination? Yeah.
Prayer for me is comprised of a couple of things. Now, the gravitational pull in my Pentecostal evangelical culture is prayer as request. Can I get this? I need that. Intercession. Important things. I think our petitions need to go to God, and our intercessions, of course. But first of all, my primary way of praying is in stillness and in communion. And so My primary way of prayer is I'm going to set my timer on my phone for 5-10 minutes, and my goal at the start is simply to be with Jesus, to cultivate presence to Jesus. And I have a very simple phrase, Lord, here I am. And when my mind gets distracted, I come back, Lord, here I am. So I need to reframe distractions. Now, out of that time of just being with Jesus, I want to pay attention to my own soul. Some of what I talked about today. What am I angry about? What am I sad about? What am I anxious about? In other words, I want to get in touch with my interior world. And the degree to which I'm aware of what's going on inside of me and what God might be inviting me into, I think I can be more present with others. So if you're not present to yourself, it's going to be really hard to be present truly with others. And so for me, whether that is 5 minutes in a given morning, whether that's 10 minutes, my average is about 10 minutes of just being with God and another 10 minutes of, so we don't have to be like a monk to do this kind of work. You don't have to be locked up in a monastery and spend endless hours in prayer to try to grow in this here. I think when I think about prayer in this kind of way, I think about mustard seed. Or the loaves and fish, that a little bit in Jesus' hands can go a long way. And if you dedicate 10, 15, 20 minutes to God in prayer, it might not seem consequential, but a little bit in Jesus' hands over time can really form us in some really beautiful ways. And so for me, it looks like the simplicity of that. And I just want to tell you, most of my time in prayer, when I'm doing this, I don't feel like goosebumps. I'm not like getting divine revelations from God. Most of the time, I'm very distracted. But for me, it's the commitment of continuously coming back to the presence of Jesus, not having a relationship with Jesus as marked by transaction, but marked by communion. And I think transactionalism is one of the greatest hindrances to a life of prayer, because we see God as a cosmic kind of Venmo, ATM to try to get whatever I need, as opposed to this is the living God. I want to share presence with this God out of which I can be present to others.
You lead a church that has over 75 different nations represented. How do you hold those group of people together in friend, and how might we take some of those lessons in our friendships? Because the danger is that we just become friends with people who are just like us. But the church has an opportunity to model something far more beautiful, which is different to that. How have you guys navigated that?
I think there are two things we want to normalize. One is the stages of relationships, and second is a term that comes out of family systems theory called self-differentiation. The stages of relationships, the way I've tried to explain it is every relationship, church, work, romance, has 3 stages. The first stage is the heavenly stage. It's when everything is so wonderful. Like when people come to my church, I could tell who's been there for less than 3 months because everything is wonderful. And they go, oh, this is the best church ever, the kindest people. And I go, how long have you been here? They go, about 2 months. And you will stick around for a little bit, all right? You're going to, and so, or you meet someone. You know, you're in love. Do you know his last name? No, but you're in love. You're going to be with this person for the rest of your life. It's heavenly. You don't see anything wrong with her whatsoever. It's just fantastic. And so inevitably, that heavenly stage, and I'm probably exaggerating a little bit, but stick with me because I love alliteration. It goes from heavenly to hellish. And by hellish, I mean you realize that the expectations you had of this person failed, or they failed your expectation. They did not meet a standard that you anticipated. They were short with you one day. You had a hope and they disappointed you. It's at that stage in normal relationships or in the workplace where people leave. So someone goes to a church, it's heavenly, and then they go to a small group where they go, oh, you believe that? I can't believe I go to this church. I'm leaving. This is like a hellish environment for me. I'm out of here. People leave jobs because of that. People leave relationships, churches because of that. And I think at that stage, the question is, what does it mean to hold the tension, which is the third stage, the holding the tension stage, which is human beings are neither angels nor demons. We're somewhere in between. We're angelic demons or demonic angels, one of the two there. But we're a mixture, all of us. And no church is heaven. No church is hell. We're somewhere in between. And if we can begin to hold to our differences, which brings me to that self-differentiation. So first of all, normalizing the stages of relationship. Now, if a relationship was abusive and toxic, of course, there's boundaries that need to be in place and community that we need to help us discern that. But if you feel like, okay, these are just the normal challenges and conflicts, how do we remain faithful here? The term calm presence or self-differentiation is essentially the process of three things: remaining close to yourself, close and curious to yourself, close and curious to God, and close and curious to others, especially in times of high anxiety, and resisting the polar opposite pull of cutting people off or being enmeshed into them. Now that's lengthy, but let me explain it to you in two ways. In 1997, I used to work for the movie theater, Sony Theaters in 68th Street and Broadway in Manhattan. I met Harrison Ford. That's when Austin Powers came out, and met all the actors and all that. And there was a song that would always play by a country singer named LeAnn Rimes. It was a song called "How Do I Live Without You." Praise God, I'm just so happy. How do I live with? Oh, I know God sent me to the right place. You know, how do I ever survive? Now, that song is deeply romantic, and it's language of enmeshment. I mean, how do I breathe without you? You're going to be okay, all right? You're going to be fine. You're going to be totally fine, mate, all right? You're going to be fine. Now, 20 years later, Selena Gomez came out with a song called Cut You Off, okay? And so here we have the two ends of the spectrum. How do I live without you? I just cut you off. And how do we live beyond those? It requires us to remain close to ourselves, which means what's happening in me? What are my values? How do I avoid shutting down my own voice, my own opinions, my own values? So someone says, wasn't that a great movie? You hated the movie, but you're afraid to say, I hated the movie. It was awful. So what do you say? It was fantastic. It was wonderful. That's enmeshment. Or you cut off on the other end. Where, now this to cut off doesn't mean you set boundaries. What it means is you're fueled by anxiety. And anxiety is an automatic response to a real or perceived threat. Most people live by high reactivity. And so I either cut off from someone, I distance myself, or I enmesh because I cannot tolerate the anxiety of the moment. This is why we need a deep life with God in prayer, to remain close to God. This is why we need to pay attention to our own anxiety, which is our own reactivity. And what does it mean to remain close and curious to you? Help me understand more. When you said that, what did you mean? I'm puzzled by what you said. Could you explain that some more? Most people don't have the resources to navigate and negotiate our differences because we don't know what it's like to stay close to ourselves and our own values or stay close to you. So what we're seeing in our culture globally, and what we're seeing particularly in the United States, are people on the end of low differentiation. People are either enmeshed or they're cutting off. So when you get the level of polarization, it only reveals and exacerbates the level of immaturity to negotiate our differences as well. If you want to read about it, I wrote about this in Good and Beautiful and Kind. And so I have a whole chapter on calm presence if you really want to dive deeper into this. But how do I stay? The question for me is like, do you avoid yourself? Do you avoid others? Do you avoid God? And when you hold those three together, I think you can now have a place where you're having healthy relationships where you're able to negotiate your differences.
Is there like a midpoint, Rich, between enmeshment and cutting off? So I'm just thinking, if you're like in the early stages of dating, and it's heavenly, 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 and then when you get into the hellish stage, at what point do you know, I've moved to a new stage, but I need to like push through because it's just like this is going to happen in every human relationship? And when do you know I'm in this stage and actually I need to like, this is not going anywhere? How do you, because it takes discernment, right, to work out?
I think what it takes, and this is asking a lot, but I'll tell you, it can be done because my wife did it with me. If you're able to name your values early on, when those values get violated, you at least have a starting point to begin to say, hey, can I talk to you about something you did? Because I value X, Y, Z, and it didn't happen, and I felt sad about that. Let me tell you how my wife did it. Rosie and I were dating about 3 months, and she cooked me a meal. and she's a wonderful cook, and I was just so delighted to have this meal. So she said, "Can I serve you?" I said, "Yes, thank you so much." So she serves me a plate. I sit down in the dining room table, and she's still getting her plate together. What do I start doing? I start eating. Come on, man. This is a terrible bloke, you know? And so Rosie comes over, and Rosie's 4'11", you know, but when she starts asserting herself, she's like 7 foot tall, you know? And she said, I would appreciate, now 3 months, you know, 3 months. She said, I would appreciate that when we have a meal together, that you wait for me to sit down before we begin eating. She might have said it with a little bit more attitude than that, but you can be sure we're married 17 years now. I sit down, I go, "Can I eat, babe? Am I good to eat now?" But what she did early on was she was able to name a value, and she was clear about it, and honest, and direct, and respectful. And so I think what happens often is, oh, he started eating without me. You're pissed off now. You're upset. You're passive aggressive. You don't want to cook for him again, or you don't want to cook for her again, or whatever it might be. As opposed to saying, "Hey, I noticed that you did this. I would prefer in the future," which is a sentence stem that we teach our church. I notice and I prefer. I noticed that you started eating before I sat down. I would prefer in the future that you wait for me so that we can enjoy a meal together. So I think the more you are equipped to name your values. Now, what happens when you name your vows and they continually get violated? Now, at that point, we begin to see what love is and what love is not. Because if you love someone, you're going to honor their values. You're going to try to do your best to love them well in those values. And if there's just a total disregard for the values that I hold dear to myself, then you're probably saying, this is a jerk. This is not someone that I should be continuing the relationship with. And at that point, maybe I do need to. That's not a cutoff, though. That's a decision based on principle. A cutoff is when it's based out of reactivity and not thoughtfulness. It's based out of your emotionality and your anxiety, but not based out of principle. And so the more clear you can be with your own principles and your own values, the better your relationship is going to be, especially early on when you can begin to name those things and not have to wait 6 months. And so he sits down 3 times, he's eating without you. And all of a sudden, by the 4th time, you slam the plate. Why don't you ever wait for me? And he's, food in his mouth. And I don't know. So, but brothers, wait anyway. Just wait, all right? Hold on.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Love Lessons podcast. We're going to be continuing our conversation with Rich Villodas in the next episode. We'll see you there.